Welcome to the 7th Dialogue of the War and the World, the ISPI program where we have invited prominent speakers to help us look around the corner and see what the near future holds for global politics, economics and other relevant fields. Today I have the great pleasure to talk about the future of NATO with Jaap De Hoop Scheffer, former NATO Secretary General. Thank you, Secretary General. Thank you, Jaap, for being with us today. It's a real pleasure. I always start this conversation with the first reference to what's going on right now in Ukraine. And I have a couple of questions for you. First, were you expecting this conflict last January, beginning of February? And the second, harder question, do you think we risk at this point a larger conflict?
I was expecting a conflict, but definitely not this fully fledged invasion. That I did not expect. But we knew in Donbass that many things were brewing, and it came out in the open. But again, an invasion I did not expect. I do not expect either, by the way, as things stand and are now, that the conflict will become a larger one involving more than Ukraine. I don't think so. I don't think even if Vladimir Putin might have the ambition, he hasn't got the forces to do it and to fulfill it.
I take your second answer as a positive signal, in a sense. I'm not asking, but I do actually, if you expect a possible endgame of the existing conflict.
Well, that's a very complicated one, because that depends, first of all, on the situation on the battlefield. And we're now apparently expecting the huge battle for Donbass with horrible suffering of the people going on in Ukraine. We should not forget that. But as soon as we discuss an endgame, the big political question will be listening to President Zelensky, who of course says from his position, I'm not going to accept Crimea being Russian. I'm not going to accept Donbass becoming Russian or annexed by Russia. And then the Ukrainian position, and as important, the position of the West, as we have been backing President Zelensky and backing Ukraine with weapons, including heavy weapons, in this conflict. So that political phase, in my opinion, will be extremely complicated.
You mentioned we have been supplying arms and heavy arms gradually, step by step. But despite and that's the point, despite not participating directly in the conflict, we have been helping Ukraine even before the war started, let's say. Let's just remind our audience of the 3 joint exercises involving Ukraine in 2021. How important has been NATO support and what more can be done?
NATO's position has been crucial, has been crucial. The red line for NATO, of course, has been and still is that we are not at war with Russia, and that NATO will not escalate up to a point that we are at war with Russia. For instance, by going for a no-fly zone, because for a no-fly zone you have to neutralize Russian air defense in Kaliningrad, in Belarus, in Russia. But NATO's position has shifted and changed quite rightly, I think, in the sense that Ukraine is being attacked by Russia. So the conclusion is everything Ukraine does in defending itself is defensive. So now also battle tanks are being provided. But that position has shifted from strictly defensive weapons to battle tanks and all kinds of armored vehicles and what have you.
Would you consider supplying airplanes as part of this non-escalating attitude?
Fighter planes for me would be a red line, quite honestly. We have seen the proposal of transferring Polish MiG fighters to Ukraine. It was a pity that the High Representative Josep Borrell and then also other parties brought this out in the open, Because if you would like to do it, you should not do it and publicly discuss it to give Putin an excuse to say, you see, NATO is at war with Russia. That's why I have come out against also this MIG deal, as it was called, because for me that is just one bridge too far. It's perhaps a cynical and sad answer to your question, but we are not. NATO is not at war with Russia, and from what I understand and hear from Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, that is still and should be, in my opinion, the NATO position.
But yeah, don't you think tones are going a little bit up also on our side recently? I mean, we are, I don't want to look cynical, we have all seen the devastation in the country. We have all seen what's happening in the country, and it's clear that emotion is spreading around. But my feeling, and I want to get your wise judgment, is that in the last few days, from several countries we have seen, and even at the European level, I would say, you mentioned Borrell right now, we are seeing tones who are really getting up, and I fear this will not ease the situation. Okay, we have to react, of course, and what's going on is incredibly, totally unacceptable. But what's your feeling on that?
Well, first of all, Paolo, agreeing with you that this is, of course, completely unacceptable. But then we have to answer the question: what comes after unacceptable? I mean, these are crimes against humanity, and I heard President Biden again use the word genocide. It is horrible, despicable. The point is, Paolo, that and again, that might sound cynical, but as soon as emotion takes over this debate, and the cry becomes, we should do something without defining exactly what that something means, we end up, and I'm speaking as a Dutchman. I'm Dutch, as you know. We end in Srebrenica. There also in the Balkans in the 90s of the previous century. There also the emotional cry was understandably, we must and should do something. We did not define the something, and the result there was genocide in the Western Balkans on European soil. So I'm careful for myself to protect my own personal border, my own personal red line, so to speak, in not having emotion taking over the acts NATO or the European Union, for that matter, is considering. Because again, the red line is we are not at war with Russia, and we should not enter a war with Russia. But again, politicians have a very difficult and complicated responsibility to explain what I'm saying to their electorate, to their constituents, and that's not easy, because if you see the Bucha pictures, you see Mariupol, you see all the other cities, and the incredible suffering from people in Mariupol who now live underground for a month already. But again, diplomats and politicians should protect wrongly defining that something in my earlier answer.
Don't you think that people from the military sector in all countries, in all debate, are taking the place of diplomats in the last 10 days?
Well, I mean, it's important that you see on linear television and radio, here on the radio and in the social media. I hear a lot of experts, generals, and we need their advice. That's very important. We were, after all, also training the Ukrainian armed forces, and thank heavens we did, because they're doing a tremendous job. But as we started this conversation, Paolo, at a certain stage, diplomats and politicians have to take over, because there will be a moment when this horrible war will end, and that is as complicated as it is on the battlefield. But again, as long as there seems to be nobody who is of any influence on Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, as long as President Xi Jinping of China, a superpower, refuses to take responsibility, which in my opinion go with being a superpower, I'm not optimistic that there is a heavyweight. Xi Jinping is that heavyweight of influencing Vladimir Putin and telling Putin that there is a moment that he has stop after all the horror he has created. And let me add, Paolo, Europe as you and I have known it and know it as we speak, will not be the same after the 24th of February 2022. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced that this is a turning point for the European continent, a turning point for the West more in general, because it is the start of the battle between democracy and autocracy in this world. So it involves the Indo-Pacific as much as it involves Europe. But as you're rightly saying, the time for diplomacy is there already. Unfortunately and regrettably, the fighting is going on.
But you said Europe will not be the same. NATO will not be the same. Will it be better or worse? Will it give us an improved NATO or?
Well, a different NATO, Paolo, in the sense that NATO, without any doubt, and as you know, NATO will have a summit at the end of June in Madrid in Spain, where a new strategic concept will have to be adopted. NATO will go from forward presence, enhanced forward presence, as we call it. I mean, the battalions in the Baltic states, in Poland and elsewhere, to forward defense. And forward defense means, in my opinion, a robust military presence on the eastern borders of NATO. And do not forget that in Finland and Sweden, the debate has come up if Finland and Sweden should join the alliance, which would mean, if that happens, and of course they qualify for NATO membership, if that happens, we have 1,300 kilometers more of a direct NATO-Russia border with the entry of Finland into NATO. So, Paolo, it will be a different NATO, another NATO, a NATO which has, of course, the looks of the Cold War NATO you and I know, because of a robust military presence, permanent presence at the eastern borders. And I think that is the main lesson. How you then define that robust military presence, because technology-wise we are in a different era than we were in the Cold War, when you and I knew the Fulda gap in Germany. Now we have a Suwalki gap between Poland and Lithuania. So it will certainly have traces of the Cold War, and I say without hesitation, we'll see a different NATO.
But yeah, help us understand. I mean, 2 months ago, it looked like Vladimir Putin wanted to redesign NATO in the eastern part. No Ukraine in NATO, no presence of strong NATO equipment or arms in countries which were belonging to the Warsaw Pact or the Soviet Union. And now what you said, what we are discussing, is exactly the opposite. How come Vladimir Putin did not realize that attacking, it would transform a defense alliance into a stronger defense alliance?
Well, Paolo, I think Vladimir Putin has miscalculated and has grossly underestimated the huge solidarity we now see within the North Atlantic Alliance and in the EU as well, for that matter. The EU has made enormous strides. The EU always developing from crisis to crisis. The EU is good at the saying, never waste a good crisis. But coming back to NATO, underestimation of the solidarity with Ukraine in the first place, underestimation by Putin of the internal cohesion and solidarity in NATO, underestimation of the position of the United States of America as the major NATO ally. Putin might have thought Biden is preoccupied with the Indo-Pacific, which he is, of course, and which is the main theater in the world in the coming period. But Putin has underestimated the resolve and the resilience of NATO, the resolve of President Joe Biden. Americans are back in Europe. We have the 82nd Airborne Division back in Europe. a miscalculation of an enormous impact on NATO and on the EU. Does that make Vladimir Putin a leader which has lost his ambitions? No, definitely not. I mean, he's caged in the sense that he is now facing the consequences of this miscalculation. The 9th of May is coming up, one of the most important days for Russia, celebrating the victory over Nazism and fascism in Russian terminology, a great patriotic day for Russia. So on the 9th of May, he'll have to show something. That is why I'm so concerned with you, I presume, with the huge battle which is now being prepared for Donbass. He has to show to his people that he has achieved something, but I think he has grossly and vastly miscalculated.
Thank you, Jaap. It is always a great pleasure to discuss with you, and I'm grateful you share your wisdom and knowledge of this issue after you spend time as Secretary General at NATO with all our people, our audience. Thank you very much indeed.
Many thanks, Paolo, and all the best to you. Bye.
Bye.